Let's get to our first conversation this afternoon. Factors external to Nigeria have long been important influences on policy making and economic outcomes. Export revenues and, of course, diaspora transfers, foreign direct and portfolio investments provide the principal channels through which global impulses are transmitted to Nigeria's economy. As in many countries, a series of global events in recent years, ranging from global financial crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, and the more recent war in Ukraine, has left negative marks on the economy of Nigeria, of course, impacting us. In recent terms, we've also had the likes of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria saying that the United States' imposition of 14% tariff on imported products may have significant impact on Nigeria's trade and industrial landscape. In the other reactions, U.S. remain one of Nigeria's most significant trade partners, accounting for approximately 7% of its non-oil exports. They said the new tariff regime directly threatens this trade dynamics, particularly as Nigeria projected an ambitious 55 trillion naira budget and was experiencing a downward trend in the global price of crude. I said that earlier when I was looking at the crude oil prices. Mr. Okpeyemi Agbaje is my guest. He's the Chief Executive Officer, RTC Advisory Services Limited. Thank you so much. It's good to start the week with you on the program.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Yes, it's always good to have you in the studio. Like my intro says, global implications of this global developments. A lot has been happening in recent times. You would agree with me. It's been back and forth.
The key word now is uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Everywhere in the world.
In the market, they'll say cautious optimism and all of that. So how does it come to you looking at all of this? Even today, it's talking about 100% on the film, foreign films industry and all of that. It's not going back on all of this. What does it mean for us?
Yes, well, for Nigeria, and that's the critical thing, what does this mean for Nigeria? I think the trade, and I worry slightly about the possible impact. We have an imperative to grow our non-oil exports. That's one critical strategic policy imperative for the country. This may affect prospects of growing our non-oil exports. Oil exports, by the way, are already feeling the impact of global uncertainty, weakening demand, and then the notions around U.S. energy independence. So there's a lot that is already attacking our oil revenues and threatening our budget benchmark. And then I've read reports that suggest that the tariffs, which could directly affect our non-oil exports, agricultural exports, things like that, you know. So clearly there's some implications, there's some risks for Nigeria from the global uncertainty over trade and tariffs.
Even the meeting, the just concluded spring meetings, IMF, World Bank, on the sidelines of that, the theme after theme was Trump's tariff. And, you know, everyone just had something to say. And there's been this reprojection about even our growth projections. How does that come to you, and where do we stand with regards to these figures?
Well, for the IMF spring meetings, I think I would take it as a balanced concerning Nigeria. My preoccupation right now is Nigeria. Yeah, I think our reforms have been well received. I think the world is happy with our macro reforms, with the subsidies and all of that. But then there's increasing concern. It's ironical because those who should be impressed, who we are probably trying to attract to invest, are now turning around and saying, but how are your people taking these reforms? How is the rate of poverty? How is the concerns about poverty? Of course, there are structural concerns about debts, which for me has been a concern. The fiscal pressures are sincere, and inflation and all of that. Those are the major structural concerns. But now the external community is now asking us about poverty, inequality, and all of that. So there's clearly, I mean, there's always been a need to think more about inclusion, to evolve policies to take care of the rich, of the poor. In terms of growth, Yes, the IMF has lowered global growth projections and Nigerian growth projections. I would wait to see Q1 data before accepting that. My suspicion is that our growth outlook for 2025 may be a little bit resilient, maybe a little bit robust. So it will be interesting to see what Q1 data says before we can project. I wouldn't be in a hurry to lower Nigeria's GDP growth projections.
You won't be in a hurry.
Yeah.
We saw the GDP, just to divert a bit from the United States, and it was down, negative.
Yes.
President Trump came out to say,
it's Biden.
So, but you know, looking at all of this, if that happens again, considering this back and forth, the country might roll into recession.
It's in the U.S.'s interest, it's in Trump's interest to resolve this uncertainty over tariffs quickly. They gave a 90-day window for renegotiation. I would hope that, because he doesn't want to start his second tenure with a recession. He has had minus 0.3.
Yeah.
If he has a second quarter,
he has it again.
And then it may become a trend, and then it may be difficult to reverse. So I think that it's clearly the uncertainty over tariffs. I think most of his economic policies are pro-growth. But the one of the uncertainty over tariffs is a anti-growth, anti-investment driver. And therefore, my only hope, even if they resolve tariffs for everybody else, and the only outstanding issue at the end of 90 days is China. China is actually very important in the figures, but it is important that we are having announcements of agreements every day with major countries, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, the European Union, such that there is some perception that things are settling down. Then if there are one or two major economies outstanding at the end of 90 days, well, or even if China is outstanding, but if we go on for long without any announcements of tariffs, I think the uncertainty may continue, and it may just have a second quarter of an economic contraction.
And that won't be a good one. Back to inequality, poverty that you talked about before I had to, talk about the GDP figures in the U.S. What sort of interventions? Because I always like to ask this question. I think we need some kind of specific kind of interventions this time that will speak to this issue, because it's not looking too good. The fallout of some of these policies instituted by government. What can be done? Where can we go from here?
Which options do we have? I think we must continue to focus on transportation. We must continue to focus on food. In terms of food, we've always said that the major driver that we can quickly address to improve the outlook for food inflation would be security. But that has been worsening with what looks like genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever you might call it, severe, that I see across villages in central Nigeria. And that's our food production zone. So I think we must focus on, the government has done the university education thing. Good. But not mainstream enough. Transportation is mainstream. Food is mainstream. I think we've done some things on wages, but we need mainstream interventions that would affect large numbers of people. For me, the central areas are food and transport. And then we can look at things like to stimulate construction, which would employ people. We can look at things to stimulate retail trade, which will employ people. Such interventions that carry some scale in large sectors, agriculture, transportation, and construction.
Is the CNG initiative also, just a follow-up to that?
Good question, because it falls within our target definition, CNG. However, what I'm hearing is that the transporters are not reflecting CNG savings in their prices, even though they have those savings. So that's the Nigerian factor. You know, so we government can only continue to do the things it can do.
Yes.
But hey, there are some things in which we also need the people to play a part.
In it, because I read a report sometime late last week in Abuja where they said they're going to indicate on those vehicles that they are CNG powered, so that when you see them, they won't charge you the same amount for the, I think things
I
like
was
that.
just yesterday reading a report in which somebody took up the transporter, made a report, and I think there were some consequences.
Good. I think that should start to happen now.
But how many of us are...
Let's look at AFDB and this new report. I read it over the weekend. $614 million is what we are talking about here. The creative economy. That's the segment where everyone is talking about digital, creative economy and all of that. That's the new oil, like some would say. What do you make of the 6 million jobs?
Well, I mean, I've not looked into the details of the projection. I read the thing, and I think it's not extreme, it's not unrealistic. The creative sector can be very large. And when you look at the interactions we have with some of these people, it's wide-ranging. It includes your photographer, the guy who does the Facebook live coverage of an event for you. It includes the fashion people, the hairdresser, the makeup artist. It includes Nollywood, drama, acting, music, all of that. So I would even think it includes some aspects of sports and entertainment and all of that. So this is quite huge. And it comes naturally to our people. We saw Dirty December. That was just, in my view, just a snippet of what the possibilities are. And if you take Lagos State government and its initiatives around all those boat regatta, those initiatives around culture and tourism, I think this can be big. I think all states of Nigeria have something they can put on the map. We can have Kaduna Week. We can have Kaduna Extravaganza. We can have Ojudeoba in Ijebu, Remo Day. We saw Egbaliganza. Those things can scale and become, and just turn Nigeria into a massive destination for tourism and entertainment. And I think the potentials are huge. I once listened or sat with Governor Fashola in those days, and he had commissioned some exercise to look into the economy of Owambe. It's huge. Really, and that's huge. Already on. I agree. So from Thursday, there are people renting canopies. There are people delivering chairs and tables. There are people who are getting ready for makeup, for gele, for all sorts of things. There's drinks. So if you just multiply that by now adding some structure to it beyond somebody died and this is some concerted strategy around culture and tourism. I think there's potential there. So I'm glad that the AFDB is doing that.
Yes, I think helping to expand that segment of the economy. Again, a bit back to the IMF spring meeting. I saw this. Should I put it like this? Handshake or coordination between the central bank governor and, of course, Mr. Wale Edun, the Minister of the Coordinating the Economy, Minister of Finance. What do you make of that handshake compared to what we used to have?
I think I said to you on this program some months back that it would be surprising if Mr. Wale Edun and Cardoso can't get themselves together. I mean, they've worked together. They're more or less part of a previous team. They're working together. They have mutual boss who they've all. So there's a human basis for coordination. Now there is
already on ground.
There should also be a policy imperative. It should be clear to both individuals and institutions, because we also have institutions behind them, the central bank and the Ministry of Finance and all the apparatus of the economic management team. There's an imperative around that. What is Wale Edun what complaint did he hear from the IMF and those meetings? Inflation. Whose job is it to deal with inflation? central bank. How can you deal with inflation without some drivers that are fiscal? You know, so there's a policy imperative around collaboration, and I think we should be encouraged that they did that show in that manner. I think they put up a good show. I was reading a report, however, that said, hey, there were a lot of positive comments, but the money didn't come out. And that's still the challenge. How do we get investors to their pocketbooks, you know? How do we get them beyond saying, okay, Nigeria's reforms are good, to saying we'll invest in Nigeria? And if they don't invest in Nigeria, all of this talk is good, but hey, we need some breaks. I've always felt that we need some breaks, and investors' investment flows are rising, but I think, and investment flows in energy, in oil and gas, have appeared to be the most aggressive in responding to Nigeria's reforms. So what did we do right in oil and gas that we need to replicate across sectors? I think that we have focused reforms around the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, and from the subsidy angle down to oil and gas policy. But I think we've not really done much in other aspects of the economy.
Foreign reserves are not looking bad at the moment. The figures from the Apex Bank, even the net reserves at a time all-time high than what we used to have in just last year.
Yeah, last year we had a crisis. We had
almost 4 billion.
Oh well, not last year anymore.
Not last year. I think
2023. When Mr. Mefele left us and JP Morgan said we had $8 billion.
And now we are about
20-something billion dollars. Although one must point out that if you look not at net reserves, so the picture of net reserves is excellent.
Okay.
But we approached $40 billion of gross reserves.
Yes.
At around December. And some of us were also projecting that, okay, $40 billion, add the $2 billion we were going to get from that, was it the Eurobond and all of those things. And we were hoping that we will be approaching $45 billion by now. The pattern I observe, and which we must use to balance I see a reason why the CBN has shifted focus to net reserves, which is good, but gross reserves are falling. As we began to defend the currency in January. And so we've been stuck around $38 billion of gross reserves. Yes, we've cleared all the backlog. Yes. We've resolved the forward contracts. We've cleared up things. So our net reserves looks much better, and the CBN should be commended for that, and the administration as a whole. But there's a question there of sustainability. If we must keep reserves, if we must keep the exchange rate around $1,600. The evidence appears to suggest that reserves are not growing as we're stabilizing the currency. So for me, that's a concern. I think that the only long-term solution is for foreign direct investment and for portfolio investment to grow. I think that's the only sustainable way that we can keep our currency stable without depleting our reserves.
So the outlook for you, finally, because you already said you're not going to be quick to drop Nigeria's figures.
Yes, for me, I remain positive. I think that the risks have risen. Our fiscal risks have risen as oil prices and all that pressure on our reserves, our budget benchmark, all of that, at a time that we were already navigating very difficult fiscal scenarios. But in the end, the good thing is that we've improved. Thank God. You know, I asked myself a few days ago, imagine if Nigeria faced all these risks without having become more accepted into the global financial community. We may have a serious crisis on our
Serious
hands.
one.
So the only respite is that Fitch, JP Morgan, Goldman, everybody continues to say Nigeria is stable long term, which then enables us, in spite of whatever challenges we face, to access credit. Imagine if we couldn't access credit at a time like this. So for me, I remain optimistic. The risks have risen, particularly fiscal and global, but hey, we're on the right path.
I must thank you so much, Mr. Kwame Agbaje, is Chief Executive Officer, RTC Advisory Services Limited. Thank you for starting the week with us on Business Nigeria.
It's always my pleasure.
Thank you so much.